Welcome to the Rise and Fall of Napoleon Bonaparte, the first video for Unit 3 Nationalist Revolutions. In this video, we're going to start out with a very quick review of the French Revolution, and then go through in some detail the factors that led both to Napoleon's rise and to his eventual fall, tying this all in with the battle between conservative and liberal forces across Europe. So buckle in, let's go. So as you're watching this video, keep two questions in mind. What was it that enabled Napoleon to come to power? And what were the important reforms and consequences of his reign? Okay, but let's start out with a quick review of the French Revolution. What were the causes and what happened once it got going? Again, very quick overview here. From 1789, when the revolution begins, to 1804, you can argue what year the French Revolution ends, France experiences revolutionary changes that take it from being an absolute monarchy to a republic to an empire. The success of the American Revolution and the Enlightenment ideas like individual liberty and consent of the governed led people to question rule by absolute monarchs. Makes sense. Okay, quick reminder, an absolute monarch, government where the king or queen has total power over the people. A republic is a government where people choose their leaders through voting. The United States is an example of a republic. And an empire is a group of states or nations controlled by one ruler. Okay. So remember that in the beginning, the peasants and the bourgeoisie of the Third Estate believed that the tax system was unfair. Eventually, Louis XVI, needing to raise taxes, calls the Estates General, which leads to the rebellion by the Third Estate because they had no power in the system, even though they were 97% of the population. Okay. The Third Estate forms a National Assembly and demanded the king agree to a limited monarchy or a constitutional monarchy. This is coupled with economic crises, starvation, famine, fear, peasant revolts. There's a lot going on in France at this time. Okay. And while Louis does eventually agree to the National Assembly's demands to limit his own power, eventually he is going to be arrested, executed, and the radical turn that led to the Reign of Terror will take place. Okay, the French Revolution starts off liberal, a constitutional monarchy that gives increased political and economic rights to the bourgeoisie, the middle class. Okay. It quickly becomes more radical, executing the king and establishing a republic. That's radical. There was much more of a focus on the wants and needs of the peasants and the urban poor. And this is something to keep in mind when the cries for reform and revolution are led by the middle class. They tend to be looking for liberal reforms. When the cries for revolution are coming from the lower classes, it tends to be more radical. Okay. But the effects of all of this don't stay inside France's borders. When Louis is executed, many European nations are like, wait, they just overthrew their king. We can't let that spread. And they attack France with the hope of keeping the revolutionary ideas from spreading. Also, just to keep in mind, the very large and powerful Austrian Empire, Franz Joseph, the emperor of the Austrian Empire, was Marie Antoinette's big brother. So, he has an interest in hopefully stabilizing things, if not before she gets her head cut off, at least to, pay them back for chopping off her head. Okay. This is the conservative pushback. Protect the old order and tradition. Okay. A young military officer named Napoleon Bonaparte successfully defends France and becomes a military hero, brings some pride back to France. Okay. The French people have faith in Napoleon. They do not so much have faith in their government. This puts Napoleon in an interesting position. Okay. Again, by the late 1790s, France is in chaos. The Republic is not able to keep things under control. Foreign nations are attacking. In 1799, Napoleon seizes power. Okay, there is a coup d'etat, which is a sudden overthrow of the government. Napoleon assumes power as dictator and has the support of most of the French people when he does it. In fact, a year later, the French people overwhelmingly vote in a new constitution, which basically gives Napoleon absolute power. Not entirely, but basically. Okay. So, again, take a look at the vocabulary. A coup d'etat is a sudden overthrow of the government by a small group. Often they are led by the military, though not 100% of the time. And a dictator is a ruler with total power over a country. Napoleon will quickly establish himself as a dictator. Okay. Now, that does not mean that Napoleon is not a child of the French Revolution, because he absolutely is. Okay. Napoleon quickly introduces the Civil Code of France, what comes to be known as the Napoleonic Code. He introduces a fair tax system with the amount of taxes you pay being based on the amount of money and earnings that you have. So rich people pay more and poor people pay less. He also creates the Bank of France to regulate the supply of money and other financial matters in a fair and equitable way. He creates merit-based government positions, meaning if you are good at your job, you get promoted. And if you are not good at your job, you get fired, and you're not going to get hired just because of who your dad is. He creates free public education that is available to all children. Okay. The Napoleonic Code provides stability, religious freedom, and equality before the law, at least for men, across France. The Napoleonic Code is a massive liberal achievement. Fair taxes, strong banks to regulate the money, public education, jobs based on ability, religious freedom, equality of men before the law. These are the political and civil liberties that middle class, or really it should be economic and civil liberties, that middle class revolutionaries had begun the French Revolution for. Okay, so while Napoleon does not necessarily want to bring democracy to France, he is a child of the Revolution and a child of the Enlightenment, and does, at least in some respects, bring liberal reform along with him. Okay. In 1804, Napoleon holds a second election, and the French people vote in that election that he can be emperor forever and ever and ever. Okay, and you might say, why would they do this? At this point, they're coming up on 16 years of chaos, instability, and fear. They just want life to be normal again. So, Napoleon declares himself emperor. We refer to him as a dictator. What is the difference? So, an emperor rules an empire. An empire is a group of states or territories ruled by one person. If you only rule France, you cannot be an emperor. Okay? Once Napoleon conquers anything that isn't France. Now he has an empire because he is controlling a group of states or territories. So he was always a dictator, but now he is also an emperor. Okay. Emperors are usually but not always dictators. For example, Queen Victoria, who will come to the throne in Britain in the 1830s, is an empress. She rules over the British Empire, which is, everything around the world that Britain had taken over. But at least in England, she is not a dictator. Britain does not have an absolute monarchy. Her power is severely limited. Okay, so she is an empress, but not so much a dictator. Okay. Napoleon wanted his empire to be global. Eventually, however, he recognizes that he is not going to be able to keep control of Haiti, gives in to the Haitian Revolution, says, okay, fine, you're independent. And without the literal land base in the Atlantic to stage his global conquest on, and also without the massive economic boost that controlling the sugar plantations on Haiti would have given him, he's like, all right, I am not going to be able to pull off this global empire thing. This, by the way, works out really good for the United States. Because in 1803, Napoleon sells what in the United States we will call the Louisiana Territory to the United States for $15 million. Now, you might be thinking, oh my God, $15 million, that is a huge amount of money. Or you might be looking at the map, seeing how big the orange area is and going, wow, what a deal, $15 million. You would be right. 1 acre of land is about the size of a professional baseball field. So think about, Major League Baseball stadium. The field is about 1 acre. We basically bought 1/3 of the United States for 3 cents an acre. That's what it works out to, including the unbelievably important city of New Orleans. Okay, so Louisiana Purchase gets Napoleon the cash he needs to help fund his wars and, gets France away from being our neighbor and gets us huge chunks of land. So works out pretty well for the United States. Okay. During the Napoleonic Wars, the basically 15 years of fighting that Napoleon starts, mostly in Europe, but it does take place in some other places, Napoleon shows his military genius. He will defeat Austria and Prussia and Spain and Italy and a whole bunch of other places. Some he will rule directly, literally saying, you are now part of France. Others he will install puppet governments in. His brother, his best friend. So while technically those countries remain independent, in all reality, Napoleon is ruling them as well. And this will be the largest empire in Europe since the Romans. Who stays free? The Ottoman Empire, Russia, Britain. Okay. For some of this time, Russia and France have an alliance that says we won't attack each other. So like an I won't bother you, you don't bother me situation. Okay. And then we have Britain and the Ottomans. Okay. Let's see how that works out. Napoleon was not able to defeat England. England is a constant thorn in his side. So what he does is he orders a blockade. He basically says, all right, nobody's allowed to trade with Britain, and sets up a naval blockade, literally like blocking everybody off with his navy. All right. But the continental system, his plan to defeat England, does not help really at all. And there's a couple reasons for that. Okay. One, Britain is the most powerful country on the planet. Napoleon has to defeat Britain in order to win. Okay, but Britain, as a relatively small island country, gained its power on the back of its navy. It has the most powerful navy in the world. And there is no way that Napoleon can stop everybody from trading with England. The plan was essentially to starve them out. The only real effects of the continental system are, one, the destruction of the French economy. It was supposed to destroy Britain's economy, but it didn't work out that way. It also seriously pisses off the United States. Will scuffle a little bit with France. We will actually end up full on going to war against England as an indirect result of this, but that's for next year. So, never able to successfully blockade England. So that's one problem. Okay. A second problem Napoleon is going to run into. So he's conquering all of these people. And he's saying, aha, you are now part of France. Well, these people don't want to be French. They want to be German and Austrian and Belgian and Italian. He sparks nationalism. Okay. He starts to make people be like, but no, I am Prussian and I am proud of my Prussianness, or I am German and I am proud of my Germanness. You can't just come in here and say you are France now. He also, by the way, on the other hand, inspired some of the revolutions that are going to come later, because everywhere Napoleon goes, he drops the Napoleonic Code, all those liberal laws. And when Napoleon is defeated and the old kings are put back on the throne, people are going to be like, but wait, we liked those liberal laws. We want them back. So Napoleon is going to both make people like him and inspire revolution, and make people hate him and inspire revolution. He's a complicated guy. And then in 1812, Napoleon makes his biggest mistake. He decides to invade Russia. Now, I think probably everyone saw that he was going to invade Russia. I mean, he's trying to take over the whole world. Sooner or later, he is going to break his alliance with Russia. Here is the problem. Russia, very far north. Napoleon does not start his invasion of Russia early enough and gets caught in winter. This is a problem. Remember, this is before there are trains or trucks or airplanes, certainly. So they're walking everywhere. I mean, maybe if they're lucky, they have horses, but basically they're walking everywhere. Okay, and Russia, quite honestly, is not going to be defeated. Literally, as the Russian army is like backing away to get away from Napoleon, they're burning down their own country to starve the French army. Okay, they are literally, it's called scorched earth policy. They are literally, the Russians burned down their own country to make sure that Napoleon wouldn't find any food for his army. Eventually, Napoleon is going to have to retreat because his army is freezing and starving to death, literally. Okay. In 1914, the very weakened French army was defeated by Prussia, Russia, and Austria. Napoleon surrenders, gives up his throne, and is exiled to a little island off the coast of Italy to live out his days. We would think that would be the end of it. We would be wrong. Okay. The French monarchy is restored, but Louis the 18th, not a popular dude. Okay. Napoleon escapes, is welcomed with open arms by the French army, who never stopped loving him, quickly reconquers France, and raises a bigger army. This only lasts for a little more than 3 months. Napoleon's 100 days quickly comes to an end at the Battle of Waterloo, where he is defeated by, well, everybody, basically. After this final defeat, Napoleon is exiled to the very remote island of St. Helena, which is in the Atlantic Ocean, where he will live for the next 6 years until his death, either from poisoning or stomach cancer. It's unclear. So, what is the impact of Napoleon? It's not that easy to say. Okay. He created reforms that, ended France's financial crisis, ended the unequal class system, brought a lot of liberal reform. By the way, the Napoleonic Code is in large part still in effect today. They were good laws. He also makes people unbelievably proud to be French. Okay. Even to this day, his legacy is very tricky in France. Okay, he sparks nationalism, gives the French people pride in their country. He also, went against democracy, marched around, conquering people, took some ideas from the Enlightenment, but also crushed others. And the defeat of Napoleon, the rise and fall of Napoleon, is going to bring about 40 or 50 years of conflict between liberal and conservative forces as they battle back and forth. And without Napoleon, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Or maybe everything would have happened the same way. It can be hard to tell. So, who was the real Napoleon? A great French hero who saved France from the destruction of the revolution and started an effective new political system? Or a power-hungry dictator who used France's instability as an opportunity to take over and eliminate many of the personal freedoms created during the revolution? Keep that question in mind as we move forward. Okay. This is, I think, a pretty good overview of Napoleon's rise and fall. Feel free to use this video at any point for references. You can, as with all the videos, find it on the class website. And keep what you learned here in mind as you're moving forward through other activities surrounding Napoleon and what comes after.